Could the Baltimore Ravens trade for a star? We talk about that and more next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use code Locked On at checkout. We're back here. It is a midweek edition of the show, which means we're going to be answering mailbag questions here today. But it'll be a bit of a mailbag sandwich. We've been doing the OTA sandwiches over the past couple of weeks. We're going to do a mailbag sandwich here today. Talk about mailbag questions in the first segment, mailbag questions in the third segment. In the second part of the show, though, I'm going to look at if the Ravens could trade for a star potentially. Now, there hasn't been anything to really prompt this, right? No conversations or anything, but it's interesting to think about, in my opinion. We did a show. It was a little while ago, was do the Ravens need to trade for a star? This is a little different. It's could they trade for a star? So positions of need for the team, who's actually available or who could be available, what the Ravens would want to give up potentially in a deal. So a ton of that conversation there. But again, in the first segment, third segment, we'll do mailbag questions. Second part of the show, we'll do could the Ravens trade for a star? So a ton to talk about here today. If you heard us in video form on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to this channel, like the video. It helps out a ton. Our community here on Locked On Ravens is growing at a very fast rate on YouTube. I really am excited about it. And so if you're already subscribed to this channel, thank you so much. And if you're thinking about it, you're wondering why, we put out Ravens content 5 days a week here, Monday through Friday. So if you want daily Ravens analysis, updates, opinions, and more, be sure to subscribe to this channel and, of course, like the video. But if you heard us in audio form, thank you as well. Again, same show, both audio and video form. We're here anywhere you get your podcasts, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Quick disclaimer, if you are having trouble finding the show in audio form for some reason one day, it will be in video form on YouTube. We are 5 days a week. That is not changing. So if it's not there might be an issue with the upload, potentially with Megaphone on their end. So just in case, just saying, just putting it out there. If you can't find it in audio form, it will be in video form. But be sure in audio form to follow us anywhere you get your favorite podcast, turn notifications on, and also be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOStrecker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. But now let's dive into a couple of mailbag questions here. We're going to start off with two questions. This will be the Afita Foy segment here. There are two questions from Afita Foy. First question: hello, Kevin. Which player do you think will be improved the most this season? Thanks for the show and have a nice day. Well, you have a nice day too. And this is an interesting question. I might throw a couple in here. The one who I think will be the most improved, based off statistical production, I think it's Rashad Bateman. That's the easy pick, right? People are talking about, I talked about him yesterday as a big breakout candidate for the Ravens. If you haven't checked out that show, I recommend you do so. But Bateman is going from a player who played in 12 games last season, had around 500 yards, only one touchdown. Is that wide receiver 2, 3, depending on where you classify Sammy Watkins in there? I think Watkins was the second wide receiver up until he got injured. Then when he got back, he didn't really reclaim a role, so that was Bateman's role. But again, this is an offense that now is going to be the top two target getters, in my opinion, are going to be Mark Andrews, number one, and Rashad Bateman, number two. Bateman moving into that Marquise Brown role. I think he's also going to be improved because he's now had that rookie year under his belt. That's a player, in my opinion, who I think will just be able to benefit from having that added chemistry with Lamar Jackson for what hopefully will be a full training camp and whatever part of the preseason these guys play. And maybe it'll be all 3 games. Maybe it'll be none of them. We haven't really seen what they're going to do there yet, obviously. But I think that Bateman, for me, is a player who will be so improved this year. So I guess he'd be my pick statistically just because of the role he's moving into. It is such an increase, in my opinion. But there are other players, too. You could talk about James Prochet. You could talk about Devin Duvernay or Tyler Wallace there. You could look at on the offensive line, is there a player there like a Tyree Phillips or a Ben Cleveland potentially who could make that jump if they win the left guard job? You could even look on the defense as well. Patrick Queen, Malik Harrison, maybe Dalen Hayes or Dafe Owe. Even in the secondary, Brandon Stevens, a popular pick. Darius Washington potentially as well on the defensive line. Justin Madubuike, does he make that leap? Broderick Washington. So there are a lot of guys personally that I think could be the most improved guys on this roster. But to me, if I had to pick one specific player who I think's production will increase as well as just the role they're going into, I think the obvious choice for me at least is Rashad Bateman. And then another question here from Afida Foy is that, yes, they said that they got some names after today's episode because yesterday I did do the breakout candidate episode. So then another question is, who do you think should be named team captain? Have a nice day. So team captains, it's different for every team. So in 2021, the Ravens actually appointed their captains weekly. So I know that, most of the teams have the guys who wear the big C patch on their chest, and that's what they do. They appoint those guys before the year starts. But Baltimore has their captains, or at least they had them in 2021, assigned weekly. So we saw the captain picks every game where different guys had the different weeks of being captain. But the NFL, I think the rule in the NFL is you can have 6 team captains. I don't think that rule is very strictly enforced, to be honest. I mean, there are teams out there with many offensive captains, many defensive captains, special teams captains. If I had to pick 6 guys, like if we're going NFL mandated rule, if I'm picking 6 guys, I guess on the offensive side of the ball, Lamar Jackson obviously would be a captain. I'd probably give Mark Andrews a captain as well. Kevin Zeitler potentially. I know it's only his second year in Baltimore, but he's a veteran on that offensive line, on an offensive unit in general that doesn't really have a lot of veterans. So maybe Kevin Zeitler. Ronnie Stanley also, he's been with this team for a while, very important. So maybe those 4 guys on offense. But then that only leaves 2 for defense and special teams. And I'd give Calais Campbell a captain. I'd give Justin Tucker a captain for sure. But then, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, all these guys who deserve it. Chuck Clark, in my opinion. So that's like 11 guys, 10 guys. I probably did that math horribly wrong, but it's a lot of guys who deserve it. So, I mean, maybe we'll go a bit above the 6 that I think the rule is in the NFL and say on offense, we'll do 4 with Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and Ronnie Stanley, and also Kevin Zeitler. And then on defense, Calais Campbell, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Chuck Clark in there. And then special teams, I do Justin Tucker. So that's 9 guys, little more than 6. But you know what? I'll take it. There are a lot of guys that deserve it on this team, definitely. But I think what exemplifies a captain is leadership, both on and off the field. And I'm not saying the guys that didn't get the captain patches in my little exercise here don't have that. But you look to players who have had the most success, who have been around the league for a while, that have exemplified all those characteristics. And so it's a combination, right? Lamar Jackson isn't this veteran who's in his 15th season, but he's the most important player on the team. So yeah, I'm giving him a captain. Mark Andrews, same thing. He's someone who has been around for a while, but you look at what he's done at this level, it deserves that captain patch. Calais Campbell, a vocal leader both on and off the field. Chuck Clark, someone who's a glue guy in this defense. So while you might not look at Chuck Clark and say, oh, he's the best player on the Ravens, because he's not, but he's a very good player and someone who has been a glue guy on this defense for years now, whereas the green dot is vitally important to the way the Ravens run their defense. And I think that also is deserving. And then obviously Justin Tucker, we know who he is, one of the best in the business, special teams captain. I mean, if this was a question a year earlier, I'd have given the special teams, I'd given 3 out. I would give a special teams captain to Anthony Levine. I'd give a special teams captain to Sam Cook as well. And then you're looking at other guys. I think maybe you can make an argument for a couple other guys, but yeah, Anthony Levine and Sam Cook and Justin Tucker, all those guys. And then if you want to go back a couple more years, Morgan Cox is in there too. So that's 4 special teams captains on offense. There are other ones as well. I mean, his second season, Mark Ingram probably could have gotten a captain patch. So, you look at just what the characteristics are for a captain. And I think guys like Anthony Levine and guys like Sam Cook were big exemplary players who showed those traits and showed those characteristics. But now with those guys not in the fold, Levine and Cook obviously retiring, I think that Justin Tucker is really, you're not going to give one to a rookie and Jordan Stout. You're not going to give one to Nick Moore at this point, in my opinion. I think that's Justin Tucker. But yeah, again, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Kevin Zeitler, Ronnie Stanley. Then you have Calais Campbell, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and Chuck Clark, and then Justin Tucker as the final guy for my personal picks for team captains. But again, they usually do it every week, and they don't have 9 guys usually. It's more like 4 or 5 or 3. So it's tough. Every week they tend to do that, and I think that's good. It's honestly a good thing they do because it highlights different players, and I think a lot of players deserve it. It's just different how every team defines it, what every team wants to do with it. But for the Ravens, they didn't they didn't actually appoint like specific team captains in 2021. They did the captains weekly. So a very interesting tidbit there. And two great questions from Afi Defoe. We'll head into our first break on Locked On Ravens. Still a ton to talk about. When we get back, we'll be diving into if the Ravens could trade for a star. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Blue Nile. And with Blue Nile, they have a lot of things to offer, whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment. You can find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. And they have simple online tools that let you choose a diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style. And Blue Nile's Ben's jewelers will handcuff her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind, and if you're looking for fine jewelry, but if you're having trouble choosing it, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7. They're available from phone or from chat, and you can even find a memorable gift at every budget because their prices are really, really good. And you can make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com and Locked On Sports listeners. Get $50 off for purchases $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. So shop stress free and find your forever peace. Go to BlueNile.com today. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to this channel on YouTube if you hear us in video form. Be sure to follow us in audio form if you hear us in audio form. And also be sure to fill out our listener survey. If you do, you'll have a chance to qualify for one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take it and help us out, go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey. And again, it helps out a ton. So thank you if you do fill that out. Let's now talk, though, about the star situation in Baltimore. Not the stars they have, but potentially maybe the stars they could add. Now, again, there's been nothing to really prompt this. There haven't been any rumors, haven't been any of this. It's a thought exercise to talk about, well, could they do it? And is it something they potentially would want to do in a situation? Because it seems like right now, and we'll talk about this throughout the rest of the week a little bit, the Ravens, the roster seems pretty set overall. And the Ravens have been a team that has looked to the trade market, right? They've acquired guys in recent seasons. If you want to just go back a couple of years, guys like Marcus Peters and Calais Campbell and Yannick Ngakoue, they've acquired guys via trade, but it hasn't been the Ravens are trading 2 firsts and 2 seconds and a good player for an absolute stud, right? It's been good players they've traded for. All 3 of those guys were really good players when they traded for him. They're still good players now. Obviously, Ngakoue didn't really work out, but that's a different story. The Ravens, they look to the trade market for assets, and I think they're going to exhaust and explore every single avenue to make their team better. But right now, who's available? We all know that DK Metcalf has been holding out, or at least he started to hold out a little bit. Deebo Samuel reporting. So, those are 2 names that have been mentioned a ton, not just for the Ravens, but across the league as guys who could potentially be traded. Now, do I think either does get traded? I don't believe so. I think that the 49ers and Deebo Samuel will probably get a contract done. The one that's a little less likely, even though I still think it's likely, is DK Metcalf. So if you want to dive into the DK Metcalf conversation, it's something we've talked about before. It was kind of a couple months ago when that rumor was still kind of hot. But again, with the holdout talk, it's kind of started to creep back up for some people. So that's a star player where it would cost probably at least a first-round pick and a mid-round pick. I probably think it costs a little bit more than that. Plus, you have to give DK Metcalf a huge contract extension on top of that. And it goes back to what we were talking about a couple of months ago, where do the Ravens want to pay a star receiver, right? Is this a situation where they can afford to give a DK Metcalf, regardless of how good DK Metcalf is? DK Metcalf is a stud at this level, right? But are the Ravens going to want to pay, I don't know, the money numbers, $20 million, $25 million a year to a player who in a run-first heavy offense might not get the same amount of targets that he would get in a Kansas City or in some of those high pass volume offenses where they could instead spread that money out? I don't know. I mean, I think that DK Metcalf would benefit this Ravens offense tremendously. The Ravens, I still think they should add another wide receiver, a veteran type guy. Metcalf is obviously not a grizzled 10-year veteran, but for the Ravens, they have most of their draft picks. In fact, the only draft pick that they don't have right now, I believe, is their 7th round draft pick. Yes, their 7th rounder that was traded to the Giants in that Ben Bredeson deal. So that trade was a 4th round pick to the Ravens for Ben Bredeson, a 5th round pick, and a 7th round pick. A great move by Eric DeCosta. But the Ravens actually have 2 5th round picks in 2023 because of the Shaun Wade trade. The Ravens traded Shaun Wade in a 2022 7th. Or no, they traded Shaun Wade for a 2022 7th and a 2023 5th. So the Ravens have all their picks plus another 5th rounder minus a 7th rounder. So they have the room to make it work. But I think for trades, you're looking at other people potentially besides DK Metcalf. There aren't really any other star receivers who seem super disgruntled right now. Darius Slayton is someone whose name has popped up, but he, again, hasn't necessarily been disgruntled, and he's not a star type player. I mean, there are other guys as well, like Deion Jones is a player who has been kind of mentioned as June 1st cut type player who would save the Falcons a lot of money if they were to get rid of him, and it would be more of a trade that would save them the most money. Whereas if they only cut him, it would save them $1 million, give him an $18 million dead cap hit. If they trade him, it'd be a $5 million dead cap hit, but $14 million in savings. But again, Deion Jones, really great player, but do the Ravens need to make that investment? They have Patrick Queen already at the inside linebacker position. So again, it's where do the Ravens have a glaring need? I think there's not necessarily a glaring one at this point. If I had to choose, it'd probably be outside linebacker, but there really aren't a lot of guys like outside linebackers right now who are at least stars at this point who are saying, yeah, I want out. I want to go somewhere else. We saw a lot of those stars sign in free agency, Von Miller, Chandler Jones, Darius Smith, and those types of players. So maybe once the trade deadline gets a little closer, then we'll start to see names pop up a little bit more in terms of teams wanting to move off of guys in the last year of their deals. And then that would be an option for the Ravens. But the Ravens also like to have money heading into the year. They still have a decent amount of salary cap space right now. It's not the most money in the world, but I would assume that maybe they, instead of maybe trading for a star and then having to pay either a big salary for a veteran star who's already been signed to a big deal, or maybe a big 5th-year option type thing, I don't really know, where you could look at it and say maybe they just want to sign 1 or 2 more free agents, then look to the trade deadline, because there are also going to be salary cap casualties throughout the course of the rest of the offseason, where maybe that acts. Maybe there's a star that is cut there, but that's a shock to everybody. And then that could act as a trade, but you're not giving up anything because the guy was released and he's not on that team anymore. So there aren't really a ton of guys that I think are options in terms of stars for the Ravens to trade for. I mean, maybe Eric Kendricks is a player, but again, like the need at linebacker is not a huge one. I look more to outside linebacker, like a pure pass rush outside linebacker. And there aren't a ton of guys right now who I look at and I say, well, this would be a great fit from a scheme perspective and a draft capital perspective and a contract perspective. I think right now it's more putting the pieces together on the roster they already have. But it's interesting to think about, because if a player like DK Metcalf came into Baltimore and the Ravens gave up, let's put together a hypothetical package of like a 1st-round pick, a 3rd-round pick, and a player like Chuck Clark. I don't know. Like if Chuck Clark ends up wanting out of Baltimore, I still am on team no trade Chuck Clark. I don't want that to happen. But if that's the situation and the Ravens do end up having to move on because of the situation, it's just like, Chuck Clark wants out. The Ravens have made it, I think, clear that they will help players get to different situations if they want to. If that's the package, it's a lot to give up, definitely, but then you have to weigh how it helps the offense. It's not just like a disaster because the Ravens trade a 1st-round and a 3rd-round pick. I think that this is the window. Like if there was an opportunity to trade for a star, it's now. It's at some point, whether it's the offseason, whether it's the trade deadline right around there. If you want to go all in before Lamar Jackson's, whatever that contract will be, whatever he signs, right? That's something that a lot of people are anticipating him signing with the Ravens. Whatever happens there, if he signs that deal with Baltimore, it's going to be for a big money. It's going to be for big money, and I anticipate it being with the Ravens. Obviously, never say never, but I do think I'd be pretty shocked if it didn't happen in Baltimore. Regardless, if that deal is signed, then it limits your ability, if you're the Ravens, to go out and do all that stuff. Now, maybe the Ravens look at the Marcus Williams signing as their quote-unquote trade for a star, acquisition of a star, because he is a star. He's a young player, 25 years old, signed to that 5-year, $70 million contract, filled a position of need. But again, the Ravens didn't have to give up anything to get him. So I think when you're looking at trading for stars, the only positions I could see it happening at, probably wide receiver, potentially outside linebacker, maybe very slightly inside linebacker. But again, I don't see the need for that because of Queen and Bynes and Harrison. I'm not saying that's the best unit in the NFL. It would definitely benefit from having another player in there. But I just think the Ravens are content with what they have right now. Maybe they'll shock me and make a move. I would not be shocked if they did that. But I think for me, I again wouldn't be shocked if they stayed put and just said, you know what? We have our guys. We're going to kind of roll with it now. And throughout the course of the offseason, the rest of it at least, kind of go through the motions and see what they have. And then once the preseason is going on, maybe, or once the final cut day does come, then it's maybe, all right, well, should we make a trade for a guy before the year starts, or what are we looking for at the trade deadline? Because also the Ravens roster seems pretty filled out right now, right? It seems pretty stacked, but at the same time, there hasn't been any football played. Injuries are going to happen. This is football. No team gets through a season unscathed ever. No team has 100% of players finish at 100% health. That's just not how football works, unfortunately. So if the Ravens have to go through an injury season again, which let's hope not. Let's actually just hope that does not happen. But if you're looking at it that way, and the Ravens need to acquire, let's say, an offensive lineman or a defensive back because they've just been absolutely decimated at that position, I think trading for a star would hinder that now, where you're saying, all right, well, awesome. DK Metcalf's on this team. He's great, but what else are we doing? How can we acquire more talent to be able to address other needs? So I think Baltimore might hold off on a trade until it really gets down to the end of August, early September, or maybe the trade deadline. I could see other options coming in, but in terms of stars, the only real star that I think is even a viable option for the Ravens is DK Metcalf, based off of the position, based off of the fact that he's not signed on the big money deal yet, but you have to account for the big money deal. Plus, you have to account for the draft capital. So all these things combining into one, I think the Ravens could trade for a star. I just don't think it's as likely now as it would be potentially when you're talking about maybe August, maybe the trade deadline. And then after that, obviously you can't trade anymore. And then you got to wonder about Lamar Jackson's contract and all the other contracts as well. So for Baltimore, it's an interesting conversation point, but I would say it's probably more unlikely than likely the Ravens trade for a star at this point. But again, never say never. There are talented players out there. And if the Ravens want to be super aggressive, I'm definitely not going to blame them, because, again, I think that this is the time that you do it when Lamar Jackson is still on his rookie deal, although it is going to be the fifth-year option for him, which is around $23 million this season. But we'll talk about that fifth-year option and our final batch of mailbag questions in our final segment here on Locked On Ravens, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about for sure. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Built Bar, and Built Bar has a lot of different things to offer as well. And if you love chewy chocolate brownie, or what about caramel brownie with caramel swirled on top? What if I told you can have all that chewy chocolate deliciousness plus 17 grams of protein? Well, you're unlikely, as caramel brownie bars are available at built.com right now. And you got to act fast because they're a fan favorite and they're going fast. You can forget about dessert. These are better than dessert. You can have a ton of great health benefits as well. 17 grams of protein, only 4 grams of sugar. And you can replace regular brownies with this because they taste so good. And the best part, caramel brownie bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, like for real. With Built, you don't have to sacrifice tasty for healthy. You can have both. And with Built, tasty is the new healthy. So go to built.com to get your box of caramel brownie bars now. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Thank you again for subscribing to this channel in video form and also following us in audio form. Be sure to make your second listen of the day Locked On NFL. I hosted the Monday show over there again, so you can check that out if you want to hear me talk for a little longer after this show. But let's now talk about the remainder of our mailbag questions. We'll first start off here with two from Raven Maniac, and I apologize because I was going to answer these last Thursday, but then I forgot about them because we had recorded the mailbag show and then these questions were asked. So then I just, it slipped my mind, so I apologize. But Raven Maniac, two questions here. The first, any intel on the Fuller contract? So yes, the Fuller contract is around, I think the cap hit is $2.5 million. There's a $1.38 million signing bonus, a $1.12 million base salary. I think it's a steal for the Ravens. I know he did not play very well in 2021 for most of the year. Did kind of bounce back the second half of the season a tiny bit, but it was not what we were used to seeing out of, Chicago Bears, Pro Bowler, all pro Kyle Fuller. But he's a player that's a veteran option, can play both inside and outside. That's very valuable, especially in this Ravens defense. So to get him on just a $2.5 million cap hit is great, because there are still quality corners out there like Joe Hayden and some other guys as well. Jimmy Smith, another potential option. But I think for now, Fuller was one of the better ones still available. He was someone who I highlighted a couple months earlier when we were talking about free agents the Ravens could sign in March. So the fact they were able to get him right around late May is really impressive to me. So yeah, the Fuller contract is $2.5 million in terms of cap hit. You got around a $1.38 million signing bonus, and also just, I think, a steal of a deal with that $1.12 million base salary. The second question from Raven Maniac: how is it possible that Mayfield's fifth-year option is so much less than Lamar's? And this is a very interesting question, and I had to refresh myself on the rules here. So you're right. The fifth-year option, it changed. I believe it changed before, like it came into effect before the 2018 class had their fifth-year options picked up. So the fifth-year options were a lot different before this. The new CBA had this put in. So before it was just, depending on where you were drafted, the fifth-year option would scale based off of that pretty much. There were a couple other factors, but it pretty much scaled off of that. But with the new CBA, the fifth-year options are now incentivized in terms of playing time, Pro Bowls, etc. So for Baker Mayfield versus Lamar Jackson is making more than Baker Mayfield, on the fifth-year option because of the fact that he has made the Pro Bowl and also has playing time incentives. And it's just different now because of what happened with the CBA, because what ended up happening was that Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen both had options to sign long-term extensions in the offseason that their fifth-year options were picked up. And so their number was actually $23.016 million. And that's because they were selected to a Pro Bowl. But then you also have other guys for the Pro Bowl bump like Saquon Barkley and Bradley Chubb. Mayfield and also Sam Darnold, there are 10 players who qualify for the playtime bonus, and those are guaranteed numbers. So for Baker Mayfield's option, his was $18.858 million. And for Lamar Jackson, his is that $23.106 million option. And that is because of the fact that Lamar Jackson did make that Pro Bowl. So that incentivizes his fifth-year option to be more money than Baker Mayfield's, but both hit playing time incentives. So that means that those options were a little bit higher than if they didn't hit those options. There were others as well, like, for example, Hayden Hurst's fifth-year option for the Ravens, and I guess it was moved over to the Falcons, was $5.428 million. Calvin Ridley was the 26th pick, one pick after Hayden Hurst. His was $11.116 million. So it all depends on playing time. It all depends on Pro Bowls. And for Mayfield, it was playing time that was hit. For Jackson, there was more that was hit, including a Pro Bowl. So that's why Jackson, who was the 32nd pick, has about $5 million more in a fifth-year option than Mayfield, who was the number one overall pick. So super interesting. Like it's really interesting how the whole CBA changes and how it changed, at least for this, because fifth-year options were considered like, oh yeah, 100% they're picking up that option unless something crazy happens. But now, I think teams really have to think about it, especially if one guy, let's say, has one amazing year as rookie season and then falls off the face of the earth his last 3 years. Are you going to pick up that fifth-year option, but because he's going to hit the Pro Bowl incentive, like Saquon Barkley hit the Pro Bowl and then kind of, fell off a little bit. So his fifth-year option is only around $7 million, and the Giants ended up picking that up, and it's for 7.217. But again, that's a player who had a very good, very fast early start to his career, and then again fell off and couldn't hit a couple of those bonuses. So that's why Baker Mayfield's fifth-year option is a little less than Lamar Jackson's fifth-year option. But finally here, we're going to look at a question from DJ, who says, if you could bring back any former Raven player to be on the 2022 squad from 96 to 2016, including Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, who would it be and why? Love the show. Keep it up. So a 20-year time frame here. There are the obvious choices. Obviously, the rules are no Ray Lewis, Ed Reed. So you could pick Terrell Suggs. You could pick Marshall Yanda, Jonathan Ogden, all these different players who were considered some of the greats. Haloti Ngata, right? But I'm going to go a little different. I'm going to say Anquan Boldin is mine. And this is a player that I'm sure a couple others also thought of. Maybe not, maybe I'm alone. But I love what Anquan Boldin brought to this team. They acquired him in a trade from Arizona. And just really so much toughness, contested catchability. The Ravens need that, right? Someone who can go up, make those contested catches. You could play him both inside and out if you really wanted to. And I think that he would just be the perfect complement, the perfect weapon for Lamar Jackson in this Ravens offense. I would love to bring a guy like Steve Smith back, like even Derek Mason. Like those are players who I think could really benefit this team that aren't necessarily on the Mount Rushmore of Ravens, right? Like the Hall of Famers like Ogden and all those different, like, all right, this is obviously a top 10 player in Ravens history type deal. But I think that, yeah, Boldin is somebody who, honestly, you could say is a little underrated in Ravens history. Derek Mason is absolutely underrated in Ravens history. And Steve Smith is somebody who I just think watching him was so fun in the Ravens uniform. Just brought that attitude, brought that swagger that I loved to watch for those 3 years he was in Baltimore. But to me, I'm going to pick Boldin just because of the impact that he brought immediately over from Arizona. The fact that the Ravens, again, a veteran wide receiver, that's what Bolden would be at this point. You know, he'd be a little older than I think many people would want. But if you're talking prime Anquan Bolden, bring me that. Like, bring me that on this Ravens offense. I think it would add just another couple dimensions. It would help in the locker room, help with the young wide receivers. So personally, for me, I'm picking Anquan Bolden because I think that's a player who just exemplifies what it was to be a Raven, was a key part in that playoff run that Joe Flacco, elite playoff run that Joe Flacco had. He was a huge part in that. And he was a trusted target, someone who I think Lamar Jackson could trust. And then you got to go up and you got to defend Mark Andrews and Anquan Bolden and Rashad Bateman. So, man, I'm having fun thinking about it. Obviously, it's not realistic, but I think that if I had to choose a guy and not really go with the Hall of Fame or future Hall of Fame route with guys like Jonathan Ogden or Terrell Suggs, I'd personally pick Anquan Bolden to slot in on this Ravens offense and add that dynamic weapon, another dynamic attribute player to this Ravens offense for sure. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens talk, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.